This would not be possible without you. And again, thanks to our audience for hanging in. So again, as we're bringing up our next panelist, I do want to say a huge thank you to Brianna. This was a great example of a pilot study. So again, we have a lot of people that are here in the audience that have traveled to Copenhagen, and you might be very familiar with what it looks like to run a clinical study. Many of our teams, out of the 411 that are pre-registered, many don't have experience. And so they might not be very familiar with what a proof of concept study is or what might be possible within 250,000 US, which is not very much money. What we can say is that if teams are very small and very scrappy and very thoughtful, is that quite a lot can be done. And I think that we just showed that very, very well. And so again, the goals for this are to show that you can run a study, you can get regulatory approval, you can recruit subjects, and you can really get a clinical protocol through that shows our judges you're ready for testing something much more substantial. And so again, huge, huge thanks for showing that and to give a little bit of evidence for our teams and maybe some food for thought for teams at home following along. And so now, our final session. I wanted to bring on some of our esteemed members who have been part of sometimes weekly, sometimes monthly calls with me for the last year. We have Dr. Steve Austad, Dr. Tom Rando, and Dr. Nir Barzilai. Please come on up. We'll take the seats. Sit wherever you like. And so these gentlemen, so Tom and Steve, yeah, take us, yeah, they're sorry, we can, I'll take this one. You guys, I've got one right here. Yep. So again, so Tom and Steve were actually part of my Endpoints committee, along with Luigi Ferrucci, but Luigi could not travel here to be with us today. Nir is making a cameo. But Nir was not on our Endpoints committee from the beginning, but he's been a really integral member of our advisory board. And I brought him on because I think you guys are seeing a finished product. Or at least a semi-finished product. You look at the competition guidelines, you hear us talk about this prize as if we've all sat around and came to unanimous agreement on every point. What I can tell you is that most of the points within this document were argued over, were chewed over, were disagreed on, and that we very rarely came to unanimous decisions, is that, again, we're trying to carve a field out of what doesn't quite exist. There's not consensus, so no decision we made was easy. And so these are the people that I chose to argue with, to, again, engage in thoughtful discussions, and I think there is a certain amount of respect. I respect them enough to listen to them when they disagree, and to disagree with me, and that we try to change the competition because it's a way that we're changing the field. And so I want to say that as a preamble, and to give, again, a really, I don't know that I would, you guys have already been on stage today, but again, if you wouldn't mind, just give your own sort of brief 1 to 2 minutes, sort of what you're doing, why you're here, why I might have called you to be on an Endpoints committee to begin with. Steve.
Sure, I'm Steve Austad. I am a professor at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, and I'm also a scientific director of the American Federation for Aging Research. I've been doing aging research for more than 30 years, and I started off doing it in the field. So I'm the only person, I suspect, in this audience who's actually studied aging of wild animals in the wild. And I've done that in South America, Papua New Guinea, Micronesia, but I've been domesticated myself recently, and so now I study animals in the lab, but I still have the thinking of a field biologist. And so when Jamie talks about functional outcomes, I'm thinking about functional outcomes, I suspect, in a whole different way than most people in the field.
Yeah, no, I'd say that's right. So Steve, when I introduce you, when you're not in front of me, as I usually call Steve the Dos Equis man of the field, he's probably the most interesting man in aging biology. I know, sorry, Nir, maybe next to Nir.
No,
we'll just go there.
I concede. I concede. My role here is to do whatever Jamie asks me to do. I have the utmost respect for her, and I'm here to challenge, provoke, disagree, but then come on the wagon and do whatever needs to be done.
Do you want to introduce yourself?
No, I think I've spoken before today.
Yeah,
Okay,
Nir's been here. We don't know.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll just briefly. So I'm Tom Rando, and I'm a professor of neurology at UCLA. I direct the stem cell center there, but my work over the many years has been in the biology of aging, very basic biology of aging, but I'm also a clinical neurologist, so I've seen patients with age-related diseases for all of my career as well. I also have the privilege of serving with Steve as for American Federation for Aging Research, where I'm the president of the board, and it's been my great pleasure working here. And actually, maybe we could just take one moment, and Jamie will ask us some questions, but the real authority here on this panel is Jamie, and so can we give her a great round of applause for everything she's done?
Yeah, I don't know that I have authority, but I have been a great servant to this group, and it has been a real pleasure. So now what we're going to treat you guys to are some of the questions that kept us up at night. So these are some of the most difficult discussions we've had, and certainly some of the issues that we have not found unanimous decisions on. So I just want you to enjoy some of what we've enjoyed behind the scenes. All right, so actually I'm going to start with you, Tom. So we're going to start talking a little bit about some of our endpoints and biomarkers. Again, really hot topics all the way throughout. Is it, again, if we're going to have a prize that we measure aging, what does it even mean? And so we've had a lot of questions around our selection of 3 endpoint groups. And in the very early months and weeks of trying to define this was a hot topic. So we had started with a lot. I wanted like 10, 12, and then we kept refining down to 4 and then 3. Muscle, cognitive, and immune function. And we had a lot of reasons to keep a very short and simple list, but I'm wondering if you would maybe articulate, again, you were one of the really strong proponents for keeping it simple. So I'm wondering if you would maybe talk just a little bit about that.
So, yeah, thank you. I think Peter also was instrumental in kind of urging us to keep it simple, and he was also really critical in urging us to use functional readouts for whatever tissue we chose. And so we ended up with cognitive function in the brain, mobility and muscle, and immune. And again, there's a lot of discussion of what else. I guess the easy one is brain, I think, because I think everybody agrees that we would want to have an intervention that would slow cognitive aging. And so I think that, even though the bar is high for reversing cognitive decline, but so is the high bar, but something critically important to patients and to people. Likewise, I would say muscle was one of these topics that had critical importance if you go to a nursing home, if you see patients in the clinic. Mobility is just such a critical component with muscle, both for mobility, muscle as an endocrine, as a metabolic organ, and very systemic, so very broad. And then we settled on the immune system, I think, partly because there had been good studies in the immune system, and there were some good quantitative readouts that we thought we could get. So in a way, the cognitive was the least easy in terms of thinking what these readouts would be, what the measures would be, all the way down to immune. But again, the value of the immune system, it affects all the tissues in the body. So I think we were able to narrow down to these 3 because of the broad significance of each of these for health of patients.
That's great. If there's anyone else that would like to follow up, this is still open.
I would just say something. It's election season in the United States, okay? And you want the politics and the policy to go together, okay? So think about it. I think the policy here is right, okay? The politics is that this is a good marketing, okay? Those 2 organs, you can really make a great point about them. And I think that's important. It also comes whether we want 20 years or 15 years or 10 years. The politics here is, you know what? It is what it is for the marketing, but I think it's so reasonable to have chosen that.
Can I say one other thing? So I had spent most of my career at Stanford, and I co-directed the Stanford Center on Longevity. And it's interesting that we had settled, this is now 15 years ago, and this is about demographic aging, on 3 things: that we wanted to help people arrive at old age mentally sharp, physically fit, and financially secure. So we've substituted immune secure for financially secure, but really ended up with this kind of same key systemic regulator or metrics of aging.
Yeah, that's funny. That actually is quite similar. So again, there were other things that we could have chosen and had talked about. I know we've had the opportunity to work for several years on the TAME trial, which was looking at a clinical outcome. But again, that was centered around cardiovascular diseases, MCI and dementia, and also cancer. So I'm just curious, if there was something in this prize that mapped towards TAME, or if you could have added something, what would you have done? Because again, we made decisions for this prize, but it doesn't mean that they're only decisions in the field.
Well, some of the outcomes of TAME you cannot show in a one-year study. Right. Okay, cancer, you're not going to get on 60 people, you're not going to get significant on cancer. So I thought what should be other things, and I don't have really better suggestions. So I think we've looked on the right things.
Great. Okay, so I'm really glad to hear that. So I know when I was first looking at this, one of the fights that I wanted to measure everything and use this sort of deficit accumulation kind of model and get this really refined index that we could really throw the kitchen sink at. And I know one of the things that I had to wake up to is that this is a public prize, and that public perception matters, and where deficit accumulation might not mean something to a lot of the general public, but like cognition and how I walk, how I feel, how I think, and if my immune system is healthy enough to be able to leave my house. These were the things that at least right now, especially after a pandemic, seem to really matter to people. But another thing that actually really matters to scientists, not just the public, are biomarkers. And so I want to talk next about biomarkers. So again, we focused on function primarily in 3 functional areas. But the original version of this prize was actually started by Steve Horvath, and that it was really centered around epigenetic clocks and epigenetic biomarkers. So I would say one of the biggest questions we've had from fellow scientists and from others is, what about biomarkers in this prize? So I'm going to start with, actually, who am I going to start? I'm going to start with Nir and then kick it back to Steve. Nir, what do you think about biomarkers and trials?
So I'm really happy that this is all functional, okay? But things are going to happen in parallel, right? 2030, the biomarkers that are missed now are not only the biomarkers for biological age, but which are going to change with treatment. And somebody said before, maybe each treatment is going to change different biomarkers, but I think they'll all change also aging biomarkers. And until we get which biomarkers are changing with aging, and by the way, some of the biomarkers are going to go up and down because some are protective and some are not, it's going to be a mess. But until then, I don't think we can put biomarkers up front. That's not to say that we're not going to resolve it in a few years and add it. I want to say that we're doing in AFAR, we're all part of AFAR, we're doing the FAST trial. I forget what FAST stands for, but it hasn't been so fast. But the idea is we're taking, I showed this morning four things that have been, clinical studies. We're going to those clinical studies, and we're taking biomarkers, including a study that has lifestyle intervention. We're taking biomarkers within 1 year of therapy and doing the whole biomarkers panel to show what's different between studies and what are the biomarkers for aging. So I think the FAST trial can actually be a good indication and maybe will eventually somehow be part of what we're doing.
Great. So Steve, I'm going to ask you next. Biomarkers or even biological markers that actually reflect maybe can be reverse translated. So I wonder if you would just talk about your perspective as a field biologist who's now thinking about clinical trials.
Yeah, well, as a field biologist, I have to say that the first thing that springs out at me when I'm thinking about preclinical trials is that they're ridiculous, the way that we do them. We have these mouse-like objects that we put in an environment that never changes. They eat the same food all the time. Nothing ever changes. So I don't really know what we're going to learn from all of that, but I do think that we're going to learn a lot from this. And that's because even though we focus really on functional outcomes, and I think that was important because Peter raised this money by telling people, you're going to be able to do as many push-ups as you could do 20 years ago and things like that. But the fact is that all of this stuff is going to accumulate data and accumulate biospecimens and all. And I will have more confidence in the biomarkers that come out of this XPRIZE competition than I would by any number of mouse studies that were done under highly controlled, highly artificial conditions in the laboratory.
That's great. Tom, any comment on biomarkers, or when do you think we'll have a biomarker that is ready for prime time as a surrogate measure?
Well, I think this kind of segues to the discussion earlier about AI. And, this is a place where kind of accumulating data that can be analyzed so much better and so much faster than humans can. We may end up with a composite biomarker through AI-mediated analysis of what comes out of this prize that may end up being something that, imagine people would agree on as a biomarker of aging and response to therapy. So I think that's another great hope for the XPRIZE.
That's great. Okay, and I also support that. So again, if anybody's interested in adding biomarkers, thinking about in-kind support, or wanting to help contribute to this incredible wealth of data that we actually need to make progress, please come see us and talk to us. So again, even if it's not one of these 3 major functional endpoints, this is the foundation for future biomarker discovery and biomarker work. So again, huge plug. Thank you guys for helping me make that plug. So now we're going to go on to one of the next big topics, is once I kind of identify what we're measuring, who do you measure it in? And so we had a lot of discussions about populations and age ranges. And so some of these questions we've already addressed in earlier Q&A, so I'm not going to go too deep into patient populations versus general healthy. But one thing I do want to mention is the age group. And so I know that this is one that I think we chewed on for longer than I think anyone here could possibly imagine. So what age should gerotherapeutics be tested in? And then specifically for this prize, what age group do we decide on? And we have gone back and forth. So again, I can open this to all, but I am going to start with Nir, because Nir and I probably had the most provocative back and forth and disagreements about what it might mean.
So in the Middle East, they say that a camel is a horse that was designed by a committee, right? Makes no sense. So this is my comment. But look, where I stand, right, and my research, and we published with Tony several Nature paper about biomarkers. Dan Belsky have done it. Mike Snyder have done it last week. There are different biomarkers for the 40, 50 years old and for the after 65. I'll tell you that the after 65 are biomarkers that are reflecting breakdown. That's why we can even in this population see what their organs age is. So for me, the age is important from the biology that I'm seeing in humans, but it's also important because it's possible. Look, if we included 30 years old, right, and we made them 10 years old, the cognition should have been increased or decreased, right? I mean, the cognition is really well established in the elderly and the one who have problems, right? How do you take a 50-year-old and get him to 30? Do we really have enough data, or is it feasible? So for me, I would have liked the people to be basically over the age of 60 or 65, because I believe that's where we'll see most effects on everything. We said biomarkers is not, but most effects of everything. This is just my bias, but it needs to be tested, I guess.
No, you're absolutely right. And so before I pass it on to the next speaker, because there's a lot we could say, is that we did start with the competition when we first announced it, 65 to 80, very tight age range. We actually got such fierce pushback from teams that actually wanted us to drop the age range down lower. So we're leaving it open, but I have to agree with Nir. I think those that are thinking about testing in the earlier and healthier age ranges are going to have a very tough challenge, making something that's almost impossible even that much harder. Steve.
This is Darwinism. The ones that study 50-year-olds are not going to win. Okay, so I think we did a great job because we started off here, but we've opened it up and letting the teams choose. The teams want to win, presumably, so they will choose appropriately. Right after the XPRIZE was announced, I said jokingly on Twitter, X, I know it's going to be semaglutide plus growth hormone, because I'm just thinking of Alabama, where we have people that have BMIs of 35 and haven't gotten out of their chairs in a while. And that's my population. If I were in this, that's my population, because getting them to walk faster, be stronger, is not going to be a challenge at all. So I really trust the teams to really tell us what the best study populations are.
That's great. Tom, any comments on age, range, or population?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. So first of all, you know, we're talking about reversing age by 20 years now kind of commonly. When we started, there were a lot of eyebrows going up saying, come on, that is impossible. But Peter actually held our feet to the fire on that, and he said he wanted so now we've added 10, but just the thought initially that we would even consider an intervention that could reverse aging by 20 years was a real stretch for a lot of us. But I think the thing, like what Nir was saying in terms of when we should kind of start the lower age range, you know, part of it, of course, is slope. So for all the changes that are occurring from 40 to 50, you have a slope like this, and then 50 to 70. So, you know, the steeper the slope, the easier it is to come up with an outcome that you believe is real. So I think we were pushing for an older age range, you know, partly for clinical reasons, partly just for study design. And I think, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Jamie, but the teams pushed back on this for enrollment. I think they just didn't think they could get a big enough enrollment. So they want to win, but I think that was kind of the dichotomy, the thing that we battled about.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And so for many of our teams, and again, I'm welcome to talk to some who have actually helped make this push. Some of it was enrollment, and some of it is that many people that are actually running longevity clinics and healthy aging clinics is that people who are interested in these therapeutics, they're not necessarily just 65 and up. And so many of these clinics have people coming in that are, you know, 40s, 50s, 60, and really interested in what they can do for longevity. And so opening up the age range allows for some of these clinics and also for a generalizability to a population who might very well be the users of whatever the next generation gerotherapeutic may be. So again, opening it to our teams, it will be incredibly difficult. But if you're willing and ready to take on that challenge, please do. Okay. All right, so that's the next kind of question. I think we've really talked about this one earlier, but along with the lower age range is another thing that we got pushback and a lot of interest. They said, well, what if we open the age range lower? But, you know, maybe the challenge isn't, you know, right along with geroscience, right? Is that we're not simply our chronologic age. And so really allowing our teams, and maybe also talk to this group, how do you think about balancing chronologic age versus some underlying health status? So thinking about, you know, whether teams can use biomarkers of age acceleration or some other biologic risk factor, or other ways that they might choose to define their patient population that's not strictly the age range. So just wanted to toss this one back. We don't have really great conversations around this. I think we're leaving it open to teams, but if you have any thoughts about health status, risk, or even accelerated biological age as an entry criteria.
So I have a thought here. I don't think we ever talked about obesity in all of our discussions, which is kind of remarkable to me, until I come to Denmark and I don't see any obese people. You know, if you come from Alabama and you
they
come...
They make the money from the obesity drug, but they don't have obesity.
But I think it's an important consideration. Should we have some sort of BMI threshold? Because if you lose a lot of weight, you're going to lose a lot of muscle mass. Muscle mass is one of the things, exactly what you said. It's a complication. On the other hand, if you can do 20 more push-ups than you could do that before, then Peter will be happy with the outcome. But I think that's an important thing that we totally forgot about. I think because nobody on the committees was obese.
Well, but that could be decided by teams, right? I think it's a good advice.
So I will push back. Luigi added it in. So Luigi Ferrucci did think about obesity and BMI status. So he did make some recommendations on what that could look like as a health risk. But you're right, we did not talk about it extensively, but it did slip in there. Luigi added it. Thank you, Luigi.
But I think also Nick Short did a really good comment about in the distribution, no matter, let's say you decide age 60, You don't want to take the worst, and you don't want to take the best. And I think this is a very interesting comment when you go to like this phase T trial.
All right, great. So now I'm going to move into a next topic, a really big one. So I would say I think the source of the biggest argument I had in designing and developing this before we went live was around response thresholds, this 10, 15, 20 year. Is that like Tom, like others, I thought 20 years is outrageous. We'll never get there. Is that as somebody who designs and thinks about trials, is we make them defensible and we power to what we know will work. Designing prizes is completely different. Is that we design beyond the imagination. And so again, I want to ask this group of scientists who we've gotten to chew through this, and you guys know the field, you know the therapeutics, you know what's possible right now. So do you think a therapeutic exists that could lead to improvements, not in one, but in all three domains, with a magnitude that you could actually surpass even our lowest bar, 10-year threshold? Open, all three.
No. But I think multiple interventions simultaneously could potentially do this, and I think that's where we're going. I don't think any single intervention is going to be this successful at these three things, which, you know, when you fix one, you might make the other one worse. We don't know about that, but you could fix muscle and kill immune system or something. But I think multiple interventions is going to be the key, the winner.
So I agree. I mean, sort of, you know, the talk I gave earlier today, I talked about on-target trade-offs, and it's sort of what Steve's saying is that, you know, we may be developing something that's really good for cognitive health or, you know, brain blood flow or something. It may have quite an unexpected outcome in the other two. So I too think that there will be, and I think all the teams have kind of shown this, the ones that we've seen, are using multiple interventions, not just one. And I think that's kind of, as people think through this, that kind of seems like the best approach is to find multiple, you know, not high dose, medium dose interventions that potentially could reverse all three. Will it make the 10-year cutoff? You know, I'd like to think so. I think even that, you know, that's going to be a real challenge. You know, I think 20 would be a miracle, but of course, you know, this comes from Peter, who you know, pioneered the XPRIZE in technology. Well, technology is different than biology, so we're aiming really high here, and we'll just have to see.
Can I just say here that there's several interesting studies in fruit flies where if you select for intelligence, they live shorter. So
What are you
you
trying
make
to
out
say?
of that what you wish.
So I'm sorry, I'm dumb. What do you mean?
No, that's great. That's good. You know, and so again, I think what Tom said is right, is that what Peter has shown us, Peter Diamandis, our founder, what he's shown us is that the crazy is sometimes achievable. And so that we have examples of this. And so even though me, as a scientist, designing things that are feasible now, is that I'm not necessarily thinking about the future and what could be possible if we push far enough. And so again, you know, if you think 20 years is crazy, let's try it. Let's prove it wrong. And so now next, another thought that came up, and this is a really interesting one. So when we're thinking about thresholding, we keep talking about years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. Another provocative thought actually came from a friend at the Buck Institute, Simon Melov. And he asked us, why are we thinking about age reversal or 10 years, 15, whatever this looks like? You know, why don't we choose a referent population who's extremely high functioning and healthy? So what if you could make sort of somebody who's 70 and a couch potato look like a 70s masters athlete? And so again, this is something we didn't take too seriously, but we did chew on for a minute. So I'm just wondering if somebody on our panel would like to take that up. That was kind of an interesting public comment that we got in.
I think only biologists can say that. Look, you know, what you go to population and you say, you have to volunteer, I'm going to make you a super athlete. That's not how it works in clinical studies. Just, that's all. I think it's novel, but.
So, I mean, implicit in that is that there's some sort of ceiling at an age, right? And that may be true. That may be true. As you say, we're not going to go get a bunch of master athletes to be entered into this competition. Or if you want to do that, then you're not going to win the competition. But are there limits? And can we break through those limits? I think that's something that we're likely to discover during the course of this prize.
Yeah, but Tom, I really thought about this during your talk earlier when we were looking at what's possible with diet or with exercise. Just curious, do you have any thoughts about comparing sort of normal aging versus maybe an exercise condition or other lifestyle?
Yeah, I mean, I think, lifestyle interventions are going to be part of these kind of multi-tiered approaches that teams are taking. And I think, the point you raised, Jamie, about, if we were to take, a subgroup of people and just make them healthier, not aim for age reversal, but just kind of functional reversal, that kind of really gets into this. Something we struggle a lot with is, can we take subgroups of people? Can we limit this to subgroups of individuals, or do it by sex, or that's going to be kind of in the post hoc analysis may be very interesting. But our goal, I think, was to try and make this as generalizable and as scalable as possible. So trying to make it as relevant to the whole population of aging individuals as possible.
Great. And so I'm going to keep on the theme of exercise. So we talked about this a little bit earlier. What to do about exercise? This might have been the biggest source of debate among our board, is how do we think about it? What do we do? Do we allow it? Do we not? And so again, we had some mixed discussions. So for anybody watching at home, where we ended on exercise, I'm going to start with the punchline, is that we had, despite the vigorous debates, we ultimately said that exercise can be allowed. We're going to let our teams, let the innovators innovate, and if exercise is part of your solution, it's part of your solution. But that doesn't mean that it's wholesale allowed. And so where we came down is that it can't be circular. So our teams can't do an exercise intervention, right? So you can't train teams on a leg press machine and use the same leg press machine before your before and your after intervention measures. So again, so it can't be circular. You can't do cognitive testing on the exact same battery that's used to test cognition before and after. So we're going to allow our judges to have some leeway about what is and isn't allowed. And that, of course, introduces ambiguity. The other thing we've talked about is that requiring our teams that if you're going to use exercise, maybe for every team out there, is that everyone has to give WHO recommendations for activity. And so that it's not just purely sedentary versus. And so again, that's the punchline. But there was a very vigorous debate. And so again, we have a camel by Steve's.
I'm, as far as I know, I'm the only one who said no exercise, right? And let me explain why I said that. I came back, I don't know if David Dodik is here, Atria. I went to this room where there was a three-dimensional assessment by cameras and by timers of my exercise capacity. And I turned out to be more than 20 years younger than my age, right, from exercise capacity. And so I thought, just a minute. So if exercise has such a big effect, what additional effect will be any drug, okay? That's one of my thoughts. But I'm actually talking about something very different. Look, and I wish Steve didn't leave that, but I have really problem with the muscle part. First of all, you should know, look, I showed this morning, I showed 4 therapeutics that are coming from, have geroscience reason. They treat, they're FDA approved, they treat other disease, they prevent overall mortality. 3 of them are reducing muscle mass. Metformin, by the way, rapamycin, which I didn't include, but SGLT2, metformin, GLP-1, decreasing muscle mass. So if the endpoint, one of the endpoints is increased lean body mass, it's a problem. And I'll tell you, it's a problem because when you have mTOR, right, when you have an mTOR inhibition, you're not going to increase muscle mass. This is, by the way, something in the academy we're going to discuss, this paradox that a lot of things that we're dealing with are not good for muscle. Okay, so we're going to have trade-offs that hopefully could be addressed by combination or by exercise. So at the end, I think we need to do exercise because we'll give up muscle otherwise.
So we just did disagree on this. And again, I think there's a lot of valid points in all directions. I mean, I think part of it, and I think you're getting this flavor, that one of the things that is part of every discussion we have is how to keep people from gaming this system, right? Because, you know, this is a lot of money, and if you kind of set up your trial so that it's guaranteed to work, and that's what we were trying to avoid. But this issue of trade-offs is really, I think, a critical one. And, you know, I think where we disagreed is whether the fact that you have a loss of muscle mass with these interventions that have beneficial effects in other tissues is kind of central to the whole idea of a multi-system trial. And you can't accept a trade-off on something so important. So again, this was we bantered this around.
But we agree now. You know, we agree.
Yeah.
Provocation.
Actually, yeah. And the other thing is we also thought that it would be important that the control group, and I don't know if this is but that the control group be encouraged to follow WHO recommendation. Because what we don't want is saying the control group, okay, you guys don't exercise. We want the control group to have the standard of care, what we would recommend for any individual of that age.
Yeah, so that's exactly where we landed. And so making the recommendation. Steve?
So I was against having any limitations on any kind of exercise. And the reason is people cheat. I mean, I hate to break this to you, but ever since humans competed for any kind of prize, some of them were looking for an edge. And in the ancient Olympics, the edge was, and don't listen to this, Jim, bribing the judges. That was one of them. The second one that I love this because I was a college wrestler is for wrestling competition where you could cheat by gouging eyes or biting. The referee had a long stick and he would just beat the person that was cheating. So anyway, the idea is if you say, well, you can't exercise, you can't do the exact same exercise, well, how do we monitor that? And, we're assuming that everybody's honest because scientists assume that one another is honest. That's how the system works. But in the real world, I don't know. That may not be the case. Just call me crazy, but I'm thinking.
Throw in $100 million.
Yeah, for $100 million, somebody might just, I don't know.
No, so this is a really great point. So you can hear the variety of responses and discussions that we've had. And the point is that there's no right answer. There's just what's right for this competition and what we're moving forward with. And what we think we can measure and give at least reasonable guidelines. So again, it's going to be up to our teams to adhere, and that we're going to put a few measures in place to ensure that they are as best as our ability. But this brings us to another discussion point. So Steve, I think we already know your opinion on this, is everything's on the table. What about steroids?
Yeah, I don't see any reason not to. This thing that Peter Thiel is supporting, the enhanced games, where you can do anything, you can take anything as long as it's safe. I don't know. Now, I'm sort of talking myself out of it now, because let's say that you won with steroids plus, I don't know, weight training plus rapamycin. We really couldn't advocate for people taking steroids en masse. We know enough about the side effects. So, no, we have to have some limit. But my thought is if a doctor can prescribe it for a condition that's not utterly ridiculous, and people do prescribe anabolic steroids for wasting diseases and everything, I don't know how we're gonna deal with that. It's another tough question.
I just want to add, as an endocrinologist, anabolic steroids are good for young people. They actually haven't worked in old people. Some of them are catabolic. So I would think, if you're over the age of 65, I would think if you want to do anabolic steroid, you have to really know, and it might be individual, that you're anabolic.
I just wonder whether this would pass muster for approval board, because it's hard to think of what the indication would be, even in the whole realm of aging and age-related diseases. And of course, steroids, at least chronically, one of the side effects is myopathy. So even though it's used for bulking up, there are many negative side effects. So I would hope that actually would not be approved.
Yeah, so that's a really good point. I actually wanted to address this question. We've had it very often about what do you do about this? And this is where we came down. It's like, it's really, we're going to rely on our teams. They have to get regulatory approval. They have to show that what they're going to do is safe. And we're going to have a judging panel to review in each condition about what they're doing and why and how. Is this scalable? Is it accessible? Does human subject safety, are some of these criteria met? And so rather than defining a whole laundry list of banned substances, is that we're trying as hard as possible, unlike designing a single trial, is we're allowing a prize and letting people think about this and chew on it. And again, there may not be a right or wrong decision, but we will have an open and transparent process to talk about each of these that come forward.
I know this is already out there, but did we discuss drug testing?
Yes, so we talked about a lot of things. So we talked about drug testing. We talked about measuring certain things at baseline and follow-up. So Steve was self-appointed, and that we ended up carrying the title through. He's our chief cheating officer. And so he has been our person to lay awake at night and think about all the things that people could do to crash this prize, and if there's anything we can do to defend it. So if anyone would like to contribute their creative 2 a.m. thoughts, they go to Steve, and he'll be writing, hopefully, a book about what you should not do to increase longevity or win a prize. So Steve, what are some of the other things? You talked about different, brothers being tested or families, or there's all kinds of wild things.
The toughest one to actually fight is people basically mischaracterizing themselves at baseline. As long as we're doing individuals, they could purposely pretend to be slow, pretend to be weak, pretend to be stupid. Maybe they're pretending, maybe they're not. But anyway, that would enhance the possibility that they could increase all of those things. Immune system is a tough one. So that might be our savior. Yeah, I've got some better ones, but I'm not going to tell anybody.
Yeah, we don't want to give people ideas of what they should not do, but it has certainly been a really fun exercise to think about. And we have tried to take as many of these ideas as possible and bake them into the competition. So again, multiple baseline tests will help. Setting criteria for variability within person by doing these longitudinal measures will help. Having banked samples stored centrally that we can measure, whether it's looking for drug testing or other things, to see what are they saying that they're giving versus what's actually present. There's a lot of things that we can do that we can't necessarily forecast now, but we can bake it as much as possible. Okay, so now I'm going to fend on something not cheating. I think our last set of questions I want to talk about is really a hot topic in the field and also in this prize is sex specificity. So one of the things that's been shown and shown and shown again when we're looking, whether it's in the NIA's interventions testing program or others in mice, is that typically if a drug or small molecule works, is that it often works by extending median lifespan in one sex and not the other. And so when we're thinking about this prize, we're requiring that people test both men and women, but we had a lot of conversations around sex specificity. So I actually want to start with Steve, because I know that you and I had some really great conversations around this. Can you comment on sex-specific effects of therapeutics and your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's striking in mice. And before the interventions testing program started in the sort of early aughts, as they say, nobody suspected this. But now almost every drug that turns out to extend life in mice, well, most of them extend life in males and not in females. And they can do it by a lot and only do it in one sex. We don't know, though, that that's not a weird mouse idiosyncrasy. It could be that this doesn't happen in people. It's one of the things that we're going to find out, right, is this. But I do think it's important that it work in both sexes. Unless you want to take the side, well, women already live longer. And I would say, yeah, but they don't live in such good health late in life as men do, so it's tough.
So I showed today, side by side, ITP, effect of SGLT2 on males only, and the data I showed in humans, so I want to be careful. they adjusted for sex, okay? Adjusted for sex is not exactly as looking if there's a different effect in sexes, okay? Which I call on every study to do. The same with metformin. It seems that SGLT2 and metformin are effective in women pretty much as in male. So I would, because of that, I'm not getting all upset about that. I think we just have to do in both, and probably it'll be okay.
All right, and so again, we're drawing to the close. So before we end, I just want to kick it back to each of you. Again, I could not have done this without you. So Steve and Tom were on too many calls to even talk about and thank you. And Nir, I don't think I've worked on anything without you in 10 years. Is that you've been by my side and worked on all of these. And so, again, any final thoughts as we sort of not wrap up? This is, as we kick off, is that we're now open for primary registration. This is a prize that's going forward for 7 years. We're going to have lots of debates and talks and things to consider as we move forward. But before we do, any final thoughts as we wrap up our day?
Well, I would just say that, this is obviously a work in evolution. We have to draw a line someplace and say, here's what we have. But undoubtedly, what we will learn from this will affect the next trial. And, they'll learn from our mistakes, or they'll learn from things we learn. And, the last thing we would want is for anyone to think that we somehow came together and had, these conclusions of this is the way to do this. This is a work in evolution. Everybody's opinion changes what we think, how we decide, what we end up doing. Like I said, we will have to draw the line, but we will keep thinking about these things as this goes on.
Yeah, I just like to say that whatever prediction we would make now, it's going to be wrong.
Yeah.
That's just the way science works, and that's the fun of science, is that you can't predict.
Otherwise, we called it search, but we're calling it research. So we'll have to find out. But I really want to say what Tom said. And Jamie, one of the advantage, you're rolling with the punches, you're getting up. There'll be flexibility issue here. And I think that, yeah, we have deadlines and stuff, but things will develop. And it'll be fine.
It will be fun. And so if anything, this is a great call to arms, people to stay curious, to stay involved, and to help us actually create the field. And so with that, I want to conclude. This has been a remarkable XPRIZE Healthspan inaugural team summit. Again, I want to express my heartfelt gratitude for each of you for populating the seats, both in person and especially those who are attending online. I know that a lot of teams could not be here with us in person, so thank you so much. A huge thanks to our advisors, not just the 3 that joined me on stage, but those who led our work groups, who shared earlier on our behalf, and many more who contributed to our discussions online. And of course, a really huge thanks to our sponsors, many of whom are here, many could not be here, but again, we have 19 different sponsors and donors, and without each of you contributing to this prize, we would not be here, and the field would not accelerate. So thank you. And so again, we have many coming years of competition. We're going to have an inspiring exchange of ideas. We have groundbreaking research. We have innovative interventions aimed at extending human health span. And again, this is undoubtedly going to propel our field forward, and we have so much to learn together. And so my final and greatest plea is to stay engaged with us. If you're considering a team, there's lots of reasons that you should go ahead and sign up. You can sign up for Healthspan. We have a lot of contributions that we need to make back also to FSHD. So again, 2 prizes and different options to look at. Several models, different things we can work on together. There's a lot of opportunities, not just within the prize, for ideas and prizes and projects that could come out of this. So please do stay engaged, collaborate with one another, find novel solutions, push us forward, because what we have right now is not sufficient. And I don't think we're going to make progress unless we actually work on it together. So again, huge thank you to my incredible Healthspan operations team, to our partners, to our teams here and abroad, and to ARDD organizers. Huge thank you as well to Peter Diamandis for kicking this off. and getting us started, and Hevolution and Solve FSHD for your support. Thank you all for your dedication to the field and for staying with us all day.